Hi, I'm Marty Frescona, an entertainment attorney at Frescona Entertainment Law. You may have seen a recent video that I shot titled How to Sell 1 Million Albums and Still Owe a Label $500,000. Well, this was a video that I shot primarily for my clients to give them a quick tutorial of the recording industry. But this video quickly took off. So I decided to take my 75 cents that I made with Google AdSense and invest it in production. So I received questions from all over the world. One of the main questions is, why would you ever sign with a label? Well, I can give you a lot of reasons why you would sign with a label. Well, last year alone, there was over 200,000 albums officially released in the United States. 6,000 of those albums only sold 1,000 units or more. That is a giant gap. A record label is very successful in moving product. As an individual, it's very hard to move product. It's very different than just making the album. So that is one reason to sign with a label. The second is, how do 360 deals, how are they integrated into the recording contract? Now that's a different video altogether and something I'll approach at a different time. Third, and probably the most important question I received is, how do you make money? We're about to discuss a scenario where someone sells 1 million albums, yet they owe $500,000. So where's the money? And to find the money, you have to have the creative team around you. You have to have the entertainment attorney. You have to have the manager to identify where these income streams are. So what are you about to learn with this video today? Well, you're going to learn two things, one of which is the obvious, and that is how to sell 1 million albums and still owe a label $500,000. Secondly, though, you're going to learn 8 key hot button negotiation points, and these are in all recording contracts, whether it's an indie label or a major label. And these are hidden, usually in sections like Roman numeral 3 on page 27, subsection III. But understand, a lot of these points are valid. The label isn't necessarily screwing you over. These are mere starting places for negotiation, so it's important to understand where these are and how to identify them. Now there's basically two scenarios to releasing an album. One would be the self-release. Now there's obviously pros and cons to the self-release, and this is a very normal route in today's market. I'll address these in a totally different video. We're going to focus on release strategy number 2, which would be an indie or major label release. And because we're talking about moving 1 million units here, let's focus on the major label aspect. Now the points we're about to discuss can be in any sort of recording contract, indie or major, so it's important to pay attention here. Let's start with the traditional route. Let's say you're a band, you're approached by an A&R executive with the label, which is typically what happens, and the label would like to put out an album. They give you a recording contract. Within that recording contract, you're going to see negotiation point number 1, and that is the artist royalty. Now, the artist royalty is essentially a partnership that the label will be entering into with a band. This is essentially saying that they will receive some sort of portion of the gross sales, and that portion could be 5% or 10% or 20%. Here we're going to focus on a 10%. That is fairly standard with any labels in today's market. So let's focus on a 10% artist royalty. But let's put that in our pocket. We're going to get back to that a little later. Let's play out the scenario a little bit here. Let's say you're a lottery pick for the label. You have a lot of success. You actually sell 1 million albums for the label. Now, if you sell 1 million albums times a retail price, let's set $20 here. Believe it or not, $20 is still the global standard, although in the digital marketplace you may see $9, you may see $16, but let's set $20 retail price. So if you sell 1 million albums times $20, you gross for the label $20 million. That is a pretty handsome payday. Well, if you look at the 10% artist royalty that you're due on $20 million, that is a great partnership you just entered into with the label. But negotiation point number 2. Are you receiving your artist royalty on the wholesale price of the product or the resale price of the product? So all the positions I'm going to take here today, they're from the label's point of view. So let's continue to play this scenario out a little further. I can tell you right now, the label is going to say your 10% artist royalty should be coming off the wholesale price of the product. That would be the lower of the two figures. Now the label is receiving a very small portion of that resale price of the product, so their argument will be you get it on the wholesale. Well, let's immediately cut that $20 million in half. So we have gone from $20 million to now indicate the wholesale price of the product, which would be half. So now we're at $10 million. We've jumped from $20 million gross to $10 million gross. Now, number 3 on the list, you're going to see something titled breakage fees. Now, breakage fees are very interesting, and it's not going to jump off the page at you. This is going to be hidden in some very crafty language. But breakage fees, they trace their roots back to the 1950s, the 1960s, when a record label was shipping vinyl. Now, instead of blaming a shipping company or the label warehouse or the destination it would arrive if the vinyl broke, a record label would simply say 90% of the product is going to arrive in one piece. We'll deduct a 10% breakage fee. Now, this is insane because this still applies today in the digital marketplace. We don't even have physical product anymore. And the physical product we do have, it's in a CD format, which is packaged in a jewel case. It is not going to break as easily as a vinyl did. So these fees still apply today. We have a 10% breakage fee. Now, if you take 10% of 10 million, the previous figure that we had, that will deduct us to $9 million. So we've gone from 20 million to $9 million. Now, number 4 on the list, you're going to see something titled uncollected accounts. And this is usually a straight monetary deduction from the gross. Now, uncollected accounts are interesting because people don't often understand that the music industry, it's one giant consignment industry. So when a record label ships product to any of the big box stores, it's usually on consignment. Well, what happens to that product at a Best Buy, for example? What happens to that product at a Best Buy if Best Buy goes bankrupt? How does the label retrieve all of that product? Well, instead of fighting this fight, they anticipate the fight and they charge an uncollected accounts fee. Always a straight monetary deduction. Here, for a group that would sell 1 million albums, a $1 million uncollected accounts deduction is very valid. So let's apply that here. So we go from 9 million that we had after applying the breakage fees to uncollected accounts. We deducted another million, which brings us to $8 million. So we have jumped from a $20 million gross, to an $8 million gross. Now, number 5 on the list, you'll see something titled free goods, and this is actually a very valid deduction on behalf of a record label. So when a label releases an album, they have to send it to radio stations, to industry movers and shakers in particular venues. So they set aside this particular product, and that product would have a monetary amount assigned to it. So for a group that would sell 1 million albums, let's subtract a $200,000 free goods that the label will set aside. So we're going to go from $8 million to $7,800,000 at this point. Still a large jump from the $20 million in which we started. Now, number 6 on the list, you're going to see something titled the container charge. And a container charge is a very interesting component because it's usually a hefty percentage that's deducted, typically upwards of 30%. Now, what is the container charge? Well, when a label invests in a band, they're essentially investing in the song, and numerous songs would be an album. Well, when a consumer goes to a store and they purchase the album, they're purchasing so much more than just the songs that are involved. There is a jewel case that the CD came in. There is a CD that carries those songs. There is an album booklet within that jewel case. There's graphic design elements. Well, a label will look at this and say, well, all we invested in, it was the songs. We didn't invest in the jewel case, the album booklet, the designers. So they will pawn these costs off to the artist. And this is usually 30%. So let's take a 30% deduction of the previous $7,800,000. Well, that drops us to $5,460,000 at this point. $5,460,000. Now, number 7, you're going to see a very vague category. It's the reserve category. Now, reserves, it could really apply to any of the previous topics we've discussed before. But what the label will do, they'll set aside a reserve portion. Now, what is the reserve portion? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but there will be a percentage deduction here. We're going to deduct a 10% from the previous figure that we came up with, which would reduce our gross amount to $4,914,000. $4,914,000. Now let's pull out of our pocket that 10% artist royalty that we had talked about in point number 1. Well, unfortunately, that 10% artist royalty is now applying to the $4,914,000, not the $20 million gross that we had before. So let's apply the 10% artist royalty here. Well, at the end of the day, the artist is only making $491,400 after selling 1 million albums. So we have jumped from a $20 million gross to $491,400. But we're not done. Now this brings us to negotiation point number 8. And this is usually a topic that everyone is familiar with in some capacity, and that is the advance. Now, buried somewhere within the breakage fees, the uncollected accounts, the free goods, the container charges, the reserves, etc., that's where you're going to find the advance. Now, the advance has many arms to it, and that's where people traditionally go wrong with analyzing the advance. The advance is something that has to be paid back. It's essentially a loan. So everyone gravitates towards, what is the artist advance? What is the artist advance in this situation? So if you take a group that has sold 1 million albums, it would be very normal to say an artist advance would be somewhere of $300,000 and upwards. So let's start with a $300,000 artist advance at this point. Well, the label has to put out an album, and they're going to tell you everything. They're going to say they want to put everything behind this album. If you want to go to Finland and record it, if you want to go to Hong Kong, if you want to be in Los Angeles, the finest of studios, you want to bring in musicians from all over the world, the label is going to do whatever they can to make this album a success. Well, let's say that's $500,000 of recording costs. This is actually a very conservative figure. So let's say $500,000. Well, you have to have a producer as well. So if the label is saying you want to bring Quincy Jones out of retirement, absolutely, let's do it. We want to back this album. We want it to be a success. So let's plug in another conservative number. Let's say $150,000 for a producer. You got to throw in a mixing fee, let's say $50,000. These are conservative figures. I just want to have a well-rounded figure of $1 million here. So at the end of the day, the artist advance is $1 million. Now, how do all these figures come into play? Let's look at the $1 million advance. That, remember, has to be paid back to the label. Let's also pull in the 10% artist royalty, and that was $491,400. Now, if you look at these two numbers combined, the artist now owes the label $508,600. They're deficient $508,600. That's after selling 1 million albums. Now, what I've presented is essentially the best case scenario. This is for a solo artist. Now, the traditional band is made up of 5 members. So let's go ahead and divide that $491,400 by 5. At the end of the day, each member is essentially making $98,200. And this is before you deduct a management fee, an agency fee, a PR fee, attorney fees. At the end of the day, it's hard to compute exactly what the artist will be taking home. Now, I hope you take 2 things away from today. 1, record labels are not necessarily bad. Now, recording contracts are very dangerous, but the way they're presented to you, that is a start point with all recording contracts. When you signed it, that is the end point. There's a lot of things that take place in between, and that's the importance of having an entertainment attorney review all documents. Secondly, do not sign a document if you don't understand all the elements within that document. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. You can reach me at my email at mff@fresconalaw.com. You could check out my blog, musicglobalization.com. Follow me on Twitter at FresconaMusic, or check out several different book projects that I have at howtomarketandpromotemusic.com.